Have you ever noticed how a dog can suddenly freeze mid-step, as if it just spotted something supernatural? Officer David Logan had seen Blay react to gunshots, car accidents, and even intense chases through the forest. But never quite like this. One moment, they were casually walking past the sliding glass doors of Jackson's Market, doing a routine neighborhood check. The next, Blay, a 5-year-old German Shepherd and highly trained K9, halted abruptly, fur bristling, chest vibrating with a low growl. David followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual. Just shoppers pushing carts, a mother managing 2 toddlers, a pair of teens laughing over frozen pizza. Then, just beyond the dairy aisle, stood a man of average height, probably in his late 30s, wearing a ball cap pulled low, dark jeans and a plaid shirt. He cradled a small girl in his arms, a tiny toddler, maybe 2 years old, with blonde curls, her face buried in his shoulder. But something felt wrong. Blay growled deeply, then lunged forward. David tightened his grip on the leash as Blay nearly yanked his arm out of its socket, barking fiercely as if sensing a weapon. Inside the store, heads turned. A woman screamed. Eggs crashed to the floor. The man spun around and hurried away, too quickly for a casual shopper. "Hey!" David called, stepping forward. "Sir, I need to talk to you." "I didn't do anything," the man shouted, quickening his pace toward the exit. David stepped in front of him, flashing his badge. "I just want to ask a few questions." "Get your dog away from me!" The man snapped, sweat beading on his forehead. But Blay was unmoving, locked in on his target like a missile. The toddler in the man's arms was silent, no cries, no movement, just limp, like a doll. "Is she all right?" David asked, narrowing his eyes. "She's my niece," the man said too quickly. "She's sick. I'm taking her home." "You're not going anywhere yet," David said calmly. "Let's step outside for a quick chat. I'll need to see some ID." That's when the man bolted. He shoved past an orange display, nearly knocking over a paper towel stand, and sprinted down aisle 3. David released Blay and commanded, "Go!" The dog shot through the store like a rocket, weaving through carts and chaos, eyes locked on the target. The man didn't get far. By the time David rounded the corner near the pharmacy, Blay had him pinned to the floor. The little girl was gently separated and sat up beside them, blinking, confused but unharmed. David cuffed the man, read him his rights, and called for backup. Blay stood guard, tail stiff, eyes sharp. Something about this didn't sit right with David. He could feel it deep down. At the station, things only got stranger. The man had no ID, no social security record. He claimed his name was Mark Johnson, but the database showed no matches, no criminal history, no known address. When questioned about the girl, he repeated his story. She was his niece. He was picking her up from daycare. She had gotten sick, but he couldn't name the daycare, her mother, or even her birthday. Meanwhile, the little girl sat quietly in the break room, sipping juice and nibbling on graham crackers, refusing to speak or even say her name. Something wasn't adding up. Blay hadn't left the evidence locker all evening. He sat by the jacket the man had worn, staring at it as if it might move. Occasionally he sniffed the collar, whimpered softly, then returned to waiting. David had never seen him so fixated on a piece of clothing. He decided to run the man's fingerprints through every federal and interagency database available. Nothing. No matches. And the girl? No missing child reports matched her description. No local alerts. No one searching for a blonde toddler in the area. It was impossible. David leaned back in his chair, staring at the board where all the open cases were pinned. That's when a memory struck him. A case from Idaho just 2 months earlier. A 2-year-old girl named Lily Henderson had been taken from her grandmother's backyard while playing. Witnesses reported seeing a bearded man near a dark truck in the area, but there was no license plate and no solid leads. The photos didn't perfectly match the man in front of him, but they were close enough to raise suspicion. David sent the security footage to the state coordinator for Amber Alerts, just to be safe. His gut told him Blay was right. The man had no business holding that child. If you're hooked so far, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals, for more amazing true stories about canine heroes who save lives and reveal hidden truths. Hours slipped by. Then, just before midnight, David's phone buzzed. It was Agent Russell from the Missing Children's Task Force. "I think you're on to something big," Russell said. "That little girl? We believe she's not alone." David sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "Your K9 found a clue. The jacket your suspect wore tested positive for sedatives, animal tranquilizers to be exact. And here's the kicker. The girl's fingerprints don't match any records because she's not in the system. She's completely off the grid. David's throat went dry. Then who is she? Well, we're still running DNA tests, Russell replied. But this is bigger than a single kidnapping. We've seen cases like this across 3 states. Children taken young, never reported missing due to custody disputes, undocumented parents, or isolated rural locations. Blake growled from across the room. David turned to see the dog pawing at the map on the wall, the one dotted with pins marking every active kidnapping case in the western U.S. One pin near Spokane had been added recently. Blake sat and stared at it. David's heart pounded as he approached. That case was only 4 days old. A trailer spotted leaving a campground. A girl reported missing, no leads. The trailer had been refrigerated. Then it clicked. He grabbed the man's discarded wallet and double-checked the receipts inside. A gas station 60 miles out. A diesel fill-up. Blaze, David said, eyes back on the map. What if this guy isn't the kidnapper? What if he's just the courier? David Logan wasn't a man who believed in coincidences. After 10 years in law enforcement and 5 years working with Blay, he'd learned that patterns mattered. Gut feelings mattered. And Blay's instincts? They were almost always spot on. The man from the supermarket sat silently in the interrogation room, arms crossed, eyes cold. Every attempt to get him to talk had failed. No lawyer, no ID, no emotion, just silence. Meanwhile, Blay paced outside the door, nose in the air, as if sensing something or someone still missing. David leaned against the hallway wall, arms folded, watching his partner. "What is it, boy?" Blay stopped, looked up at him, tail still, ears alert. Then Blay turned and trotted back toward the evidence room. David followed closely behind. Inside, Blay headed straight for the suspect's jacket, the same one he had barked at earlier. This time, Blay pawed at the pocket but didn't growl. Instead, he let out a low, anxious whine. David put on a pair of gloves and carefully turned the jacket inside out. The lining felt thicker than usual. Running his fingers along the seam, he detected a slight edge, something sewn into the fabric. Using a utility knife, he carefully cut open the seam and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It smelled old, with hints of oil and a faint metallic scent. Unfolding it, David saw a roughly sketched map, marked highways, some handwritten notes, and a red X near a place called Silver Pine Rest Stop. Tracing the route, he realized it was a few hours north, close to the Idaho border. David looked down at Blay. Ready for a ride? By sunrise, David and Blay were heading north on I-82 in an unmarked cruiser. Snow capped the distant mountains, and thick fog lingered over the valleys below. Blay sat alert in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the passing scenery as if piecing together clues in his mind. David kept glancing at the map, puzzled. If the man wasn't the kidnapper, as he suspected, then who was he? A courier? A mule for a larger operation? And what exactly was waiting at that rest stop? When they finally exited the interstate and followed the winding road to Silver Pine, the place looked like any other run-down roadside stop. A single gas pump stood beside a vending machine that probably hadn't worked in years, and a cracked picnic table sat under a pine tree, half buried in fallen needles. David parked behind some bushes and let Blay off the leash. He trusted him completely. "Find it," David said. Blay started slowly, sniffing the air, ears twitching. Then something shifted. He lowered his head and dashed straight toward the woods behind the picnic table. David's heart pounded as he followed. Blay led him about 50 yards into the trees before stopping suddenly, paw frozen, mid-step. He barked once. Pushing past a tangle of low branches, David spotted fresh tire tracks partially covered by leaves and mud, likely from a large vehicle, maybe a trailer. Blay sniffed the ground and began pawing at a patch of leaves near a fallen log. David cleared the debris and found a small piece of plastic, blue and square-shaped. He picked it up. It was a wristband, faded but still readable. Number 16. Back at the station that evening, David couldn't stop staring at the wristband. It resembled the hospital-style bands given to kids at summer camps or daycare centers. But this one wasn't bright or cheerful. It was cheap, dirty, and clearly used. He called Agent Russell from the task force again. "You were right," David said. "That little girl might not be the only one." He told Russell about the map, the rest stop, and the wristband. After a brief silence, Russell said, "There's something you need to see. I'm sending you a photo now." David's phone buzzed a few seconds later. The image showed a recovered site in Montana from 3 months ago, an abandoned trailer with makeshift bunks inside. On the far wall was a chalkboard listing names. Some first names, some nicknames, each paired with a number. 3. Lily. Number 9. Gracie. Number 16. Button. The nickname matched a missing persons report from rural Wyoming. A little girl, just under 3 years old, had been taken from her front yard while her father was changing a tire in the garage. She was never found. David's stomach dropped as he glanced over at Blay, now curled up in his dog bed, tail flicking slightly in his sleep. There was no denying it anymore. They were dealing with something highly organized. The next morning, David met with the precinct captain and 2 state investigators. The man from the supermarket remained silent, and the little girl hadn't spoken a word either. No progress there. But David had a theory. "This guy isn't working alone," he said. "He claims to be just one link in a chain." He laid out the evidence, the map, the wristband, the similarities between the sites. "He's transporting children, probably moving them across state lines," David continued. "He's part of a network using isolated locations, old rest stops, motels, abandoned trailers, as temporary holding spots." The captain leaned forward. "What's the motive, ransom?" David shook his head. "No demands, no messages, no contact. This isn't about money. It's about making kids disappear quietly without a trace. The kind no one reports, or the ones people give up on after a week." Agent Russell added, "We believe some are taken from unstable family situations, others from remote communities. The group responsible knows exactly how to pick their targets." A heavy silence followed. Then David said, "Let me work with Blay. Give us 2 days. Let us track." The captain nodded slowly. "You've got 48 hours. By dusk, David and Blay were back on the road, retracing the route from the rest stop, stopping at truck depots and gas stations listed on the man's receipts. It was Blay who found the next clue. At an old way station just off the highway, Blay sniffed around a drainage ditch and suddenly barked wildly. David rushed over and found a burned plastic bin, melted and charred, but inside were shreds of fabric, pieces of children's clothing, and more wristbands. Numbers ranged from 21 to 27. One still had the name Toby written in faded ink. David's heart raced. That name was familiar. He flipped through his notebook and found it. Toby Wren, age 4, taken from a shelter parking lot in Utah 6 weeks ago. The connection was undeniable. Now they weren't just transporting kids, they were cataloging them. David and Blay returned to the precinct at midnight, exhausted but wired. Every part of him wanted to keep going, to find the next clue, the next hiding place, the next piece of this terrible puzzle. He knelt beside Blay and scratched behind his ears. "We're not stopping, are we, buddy?" Blay licked his hand, then looked back toward the map wall, eyes sharp. David followed his gaze. There, barely visible beneath a pinned photo of the Montana trailer, was a note scribbled months ago during another case. "Man in plaid, blonde toddler, seen at Wilson's Market, different state." Same description. David's eyes narrowed. They'd seen this man before, and had let him walk. David Logan hadn't slept more than 3 hours in 2 days. Coffee had become his lifeline. But exhaustion wasn't the worst part. It was the gnawing weight in his gut, the kind that comes when you know the clock is ticking and lives are at stake. He stood over the evidence table, scattered with maps, printed receipts, old photos of missing children, and a handful of colored pushpins marking several counties in the Northwest. Blay sat quietly beside him, ears twitching every time someone entered the room, eyes never straying far from the suspect's discarded jacket, still sealed in an evidence bag. The room buzzed with low conversation. Agent Russell, the federal liaison, leaned over a laptop, zooming in on a blurry security photo. "This is from Wilson's Market, 3 states over," he said, pointing at the screen. "Surveillance caught him 5 weeks ago. Same man, same baseball cap, holding another toddler, a different child." David squinted at the grainy image. It was hard to tell, but the child looked smaller, with dark hair, maybe a boy. "He changes who he's carrying," David muttered. Russell nodded in agreement. "What about the little girl we have now?" David asked. "Any luck identifying her?" Russell sighed. "The DNA came back about an hour ago. She's Lily Henderson, missing from Idaho. That's a confirmed match, but she's not on any national database." Her grandmother reported her missing, but since she wasn't her legal guardian, no official Amber Alert was ever issued. David clenched his jaw. That explains why our initial search came up empty. There's more, Russell added. We cross-referenced her DNA with a sample collected in Montana. There's a match, another girl. They share the same father. Wait, are you saying Lily might have a sibling in the system? David asked, eyes narrowing. Russell nodded grimly. Yes, but we haven't located her yet. David glanced at Blay. The dog hadn't moved, but was tense, alert. Watching and listening, David grabbed his notepad and jotted down a note. Lily plus sibling. Pattern transported together, then split up. He couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't just organized, it was deliberate, calculated. Later that afternoon, David took Blay for a walk behind the station, letting him stretch his legs. The air was cool and dry, early October leaves crunching beneath their feet. Blay sniffed the ground, tail stiff. They didn't need words. Their bond had been forged over years of late-night calls, chases, rescues, and search missions. David pulled out his phone and opened an app that accessed statewide surveillance networks. One image kept bothering him, the map drawn inside the jacket. It showed several rest stops, including one they hadn't checked yet. Dry Creek Trailhead. It was up in the hills, less traveled, off a back road that hadn't been maintained in years. He hesitated, then dialed. Captain, it's Logan. I need permission to check out a trailhead north of Baker County. It's marked on a hand-drawn map we found in the jacket. Think there's something there? The captain asked. Blay does, David replied without hesitation. A pause. Then the captain said, Take backup, but you lead. By sunset, David, Blay, and a deputy named Chris were making their way up the winding trail toward Dry Creek. The area was eerily quiet. No campers, no hikers, just thick trees, the distant sound of rushing water, and the crunch of boots on pine needles. At the edge of a clearing, Blay stopped. His whole body shifted, head low, nostrils flaring, tail stiff. He let out a short, sharp bark. David motioned for Chris to hold back. Go, Blay, he whispered. The German shepherd bolted toward a moss-covered boulder and began circling it. Then he stopped, pawing rapidly at the ground. Desperate, David ran over and dropped to his knees. He brushed away pine needles and uncovered a thin layer of loose soil. Beneath it was plywood, rotten and old but recently disturbed. He pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a concrete hatch, a hidden entrance. Jesus, Chris whispered. David dropped his flashlight into the opening. The beam illuminated metal stairs leading down into darkness. Taking a deep breath, David drew his weapon and descended, Blay at his side. The smell hit first. Damp, musty with hints of mold, sweat, and something faintly metallic. David swept the light across the bare concrete walls. A small generator hummed somewhere in the background. As they rounded a corner, Blay stiffened and growled. David's light landed on a makeshift room. Mattresses, tiny clothes, children's shoes lined up against the wall. Then came a whisper, a faint, fragile voice. Is he gone? David turned slowly. Behind a pile of blankets in the corner was a boy, about 6 years old, eyes wide and face pale. David lowered his weapon. Hey, buddy, it's okay. I'm Officer Logan. You're safe now. The boy didn't move. He said if we screamed, the bad man would come back. You're safe, David repeated firmly. I promise. Blay moved closer, lying down beside the boy, tail wagging gently. The boy looked at Blay, then whispered, He kept the others. It took another hour to safely extract the child and call in a full unit. Search teams combed the surrounding area, but found no more children. Only signs they had been there, blankets, toothbrushes, and a scribbled list on the wall with names and numbers. David scanned the list. 3. Lily. Number 9. Gracie. Number 16. Button. Number 21. Toby. Number 28. No name, just a question mark. Russell called David the next morning. The boy you recovered is Toby Wren, Russell said. He went missing 6 weeks ago from Utah. He's number 21 on the list. That means there are still 7 children unaccounted for. David sat quietly in the briefing room, the weight of that number pressing down on him. 7 kids somewhere out there, and the unnamed number 28, possibly still with the man they'd caught, or maybe someone else entirely. Back at the station, Blay sat patiently beside the bench where Lily now played with a donated teddy bear. She still wouldn't speak, but every time Blay settled next to her, a small smile would cross her face. David watched them for a moment, then turned his gaze toward the glass where the suspect remained silent. No name, no confession, no remorse. But now they had proof. They had Toby. They had Blay. And David knew this was only the beginning. The next morning dawned with rain. David Logan stood on the precinct steps, coffee in hand, watching droplets slide down the windshield of his patrol car. It was the kind of soft, misty rain that seemed to seep into your bones. But Blay didn't mind. The K9 sat beside him, tail still, eyes sharp, scanning the lot as if waiting for something or someone to move. Inside, the suspect remained mute. Not a single word, not even after Toby Wren, the 6-year-old they'd rescued, positively identified him in a photo lineup. "That's the one who brought us food," the boy had said quietly. "He never hit us, but he watched us." David had heard enough. If the man wouldn't talk, maybe his scent would. In the evidence room, David donned gloves and laid out the suspect's clothing from the arrest. His shirt, shoes, socks, even the beanie he'd worn. Blay approached slowly, nose twitching. David gave the command, "Track it." Blay began circling the table, then paused, pressing his nose against the sole of one shoe. His body stiffened, and a low bark followed. David's heart raced. "You found something?" Blay backed away from the table, sat, and stared at the door. He was ready to move. They started near the interstate, following the suspect's last known route before the supermarket. Blay picked up the scent immediately and led them off the main road, down a narrow gravel lane curving behind a row of abandoned warehouses. David followed in his cruiser, while a state trooper team shadowed them in an unmarked SUV. Blay stopped at an old gate. The chain rusted shut, weeds growing up the hinges. David parked and stepped out. Blay barked twice and trotted toward the back of the property. The place had once been a freight shipping center. Now it was a skeleton. Peeling paint, broken windows, empty, overgrown truck docks. Blay stopped suddenly at one of the loading bays. He sniffed twice, then began scratching furiously at the floor. David knelt down, brushing away leaves and debris. He spotted a set of parallel grooves, tire marks, faint but fresh. He pulled out his flashlight and scanned the edge of the dock. That's when he saw it. A patch of dried mud smeared across the back of a bay door. The tread pattern was distinct. Too narrow for a car, too clean for construction vehicles. Trailer rubber and recently used. David called it in. Within the hour, the site was swarming with investigators, ground-penetrating radar, dogs, drones. Still, Blay stood nearby, eyes locked on the bay door as if expecting it to open at any moment. Then a technician shouted from inside the warehouse, "Hey, you guys need to see this." David jogged up the steps and followed the tech into the darkened space. The air smelled of rot and mildew, but the back room held something colder. Metal lockers, 28 of them, rusted shut and chained together with a single padlock. At first, it looked like junk, until they found what was taped to the inside of one door. A child's drawing, crayon on torn paper, a sun, a stick figure, a dog, and beneath it, the words, "K9 Blay Hero." David stared at it, throat tight. Someone knew he was out there, he murmured. Back at the station, Russell stood before a whiteboard covered with photos and maps. "We've identified at least 3 holding sites," he said. 2 confirmed, Montana and here. The 3rd is still active, we believe, but it's mobile. Trailers moved every 2 weeks, always along the same corridor. He drew a line connecting dots between Oregon, Idaho, and Wyoming. Whoever's running this is smart. They don't keep the kids in one place too long. No paper trail, no cameras. The only link between the sites is this guy, our silent suspect, and the pattern of diesel fuel and narrow freight access points. David leaned forward, glancing at Blay. Russell nodded. "Your dog's the only reason we're even close." David motioned toward the map. One of the children had seen him, maybe during transport. Russell's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it before holding it up. "We got a hit. Security footage from a Nevada truck stop last night. The screen showed a man with a different face, but wearing the same plaid shirt and cap, leading a little girl by the hand toward a refrigerated semi-trailer. David's blood ran cold. "That's number 28, Russell said. An hour later, they were on the move. Blay sat harnessed and alert in the back of the SUV as they headed toward Elko, Nevada, truck stop central surrounded by desert and back roads, perfect for hiding in plain sight. By nightfall, they reached the last known location. The trailer was gone, but Blay jumped out and immediately locked onto a scent. He barked once, twice, then pulled toward the rear of the lot, heading for a cluster of dumpsters behind a diner. David followed quickly. Behind the dumpsters was a narrow, rocky strip of land leading to a drainage canal. Blay stopped at the edge and barked loudly. David scanned the ground with his flashlight. There it was, another wristband. This one read number 28. Beside it, barely visible in the dirt, lay a pacifier. David swallowed hard. She had been here, recently. The next 12 hours blurred together. Blay tracked the scent through back roads and alleys. State troopers canvassed truck stops. A local tip came in. A man matching the suspect's description had bought diesel at a 24-hour pump 30 minutes south. No plates, paid in cash. They were close. Too close to stop now. By morning, Blay was exhausted but still pulling forward with determination. David refused to let him down. At a checkpoint near the Utah border, they finally got their break. A trooper flagged down a suspicious vehicle, a refrigerated semi with mismatched plates and a driver who reeked of fear. David and Blay arrived 10 minutes later. Inside the trailer, 27 children were crammed into makeshift bunks, scared, cold, but alive. All accounted for except one. Number 28 was missing. David stood in the dust, watching the sun rise behind the mountains. Blay sat beside him, eyes fixed on the horizon. They had saved so many, but one was still out there. And somewhere, David knew, the person holding the key wasn't the courier they'd arrested. It was someone else. Someone watching. Someone waiting. Blay turned his head, ears perked, then started walking toward the hills. David followed. The wind cut sharply over the Utah foothills as David Logan trailed Blay through sparse brush. The semi-trailer they'd intercepted hours earlier had held 27 children, 27 souls pulled from the edge of a nightmare. But one was missing. Number 28. A pacifier, a wristband, and a faint scent trail into the hills were all they had. Blay paused near a cluster of rocks and sniffed the ground. He didn't bark this time. Instead, he looked up at David, ears tilted back. Something had changed. David knelt to examine the area. There were boot prints, small, like a child's, but scattered, not in a straight line. A few scuffs along a stone ledge showed signs of a struggle. And there, tangled in a thorn bush, was a piece of pink fabric. David pulled it free. A torn sleeve. He swallowed hard. She had been here. Blay circled the area twice, then stopped at a patch of disturbed dirt. He barked once, short and low. David's heart pounded. They called in a forensic team and a dog handler with ground-penetrating radar. Within an hour, they uncovered something buried beneath the rocks. A suitcase, heavy and caked in dirt, its latches rusted shut. When David forced it open, his breath caught. Inside, curled into a fetal position, was a child, a little girl, still silent. But then her eyes fluttered open, just barely. She blinked up at the morning light, and the only word she whispered was, "Blay." David dropped to his knees. "We've got you," he murmured, his voice thick with relief. "We've got you." Paramedics rushed in. The child, later identified as Madison Reeve, age 3, was alive but dehydrated, malnourished, and barely responsive. Within the hour, she was airlifted to the nearest hospital in Salt Lake City. Blay watched the helicopter lift off, tail still, eyes fixed on the sky. For David, it was the first time in days he allowed himself to feel something other than urgency. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle around him. Back at the precinct, the news broke nationwide. K9 Blay leads. Officers to hidden trafficking network. 28 children rescued. Every major outlet covered the story. CNN, NBC, even international media. Social media exploded with hashtags. K9 Hero and Blay the Brave. Justice for the 28. But none of that mattered to David. What mattered was who had put Madison in that suitcase, and why. She hadn't been left behind by accident. She'd been hidden, buried alive, and her last word before losing consciousness was his dog's name. Later that night, David sat across from the suspect in the interrogation room. The man remained silent. No words, no confession. But David had something new, something to pry loose the truth he was holding on to. He placed a photo on the table. Madison, eyes closed in a hospital bed, IV taped to her arm. Then a second photo, the suitcase. Then a third, the wristband marked number 28. "You buried her," David said quietly. "And we found her." The man didn't blink. David leaned in. "But here's the thing. She wasn't supposed to die, was she? You were protecting her, hiding her from the others, weren't you?" "Still nothing." David exhaled slowly. "We found a name on a scrap of paper sewn into your jacket lining. Ellis. Who's Ellis?" The man's fingers twitched, just once. David caught it. "That's who you're afraid of," he said, voice colder now. "Not us, not prison, Ellis. You're not running this network. You're just a part of it." He leaned in closer, tapping Blais's name tag against the table. "But here's what you didn't count on." Outside the room, Blais stood watching through the glass, head tilted. He hadn't stopped observing the suspect since they brought him in. David opened the door. Blais patted in slowly, calm and steady. The suspect's eyes dropped for the first time in hours, right to the dog. David noticed the subtle shift, a flicker of fear. "See," David said, circling the table. "You thought burying her would send a message, but all you did was leave your trail in the dirt." He paused. "And Blais doesn't miss trails." The man's hands clenched into fists. Still no words, but David saw the tremor in his jaw. The cracks were beginning to show. Later that night, David and Russell stood over a spread of documents pulled from the suspect's locker, burned ledgers, scorched photos, and one chilling list. It was typed, neat, and organized. Children's names, ages, locations, cross-referenced by drop points and dates, but one name stood out, marked with a star. Madison Reeve. Hold for Ellis. Russell exhaled. So Madison wasn't supposed to be delivered. She was being reserved. David stared at the name. Ellis is higher up. Someone in charge. He looked down at Blais, now curled up in the corner. "We're not done," he said. The next day, David visited Madison in the hospital. She was awake, weak but safe. Her parents, previously thought deceased, had been found in Arizona. It turned out she was taken during a family custody dispute involving forged paperwork, another failure of the system. When Madison saw Blais enter the room, her eyes lit up for the first time. She didn't say a word, but she reached out and gently touched the K9 patch on his vest. David smiled, blinking back tears. "He found you," he whispered. Madison nodded slowly, then barely breathed. "He took the others, but I kept him." David froze. "What did you say?" She looked at Blais. "The man, the one with the broken tooth. He said he took the others, but I kept him." David's blood ran cold. Broken tooth. Not the man they had in custody. Someone else. Someone Madison had seen. Someone still out there. Back at the precinct, David printed every known photo of prior arrests linked to trafficking across state lines. Mugshots, driver's licenses, anyone with a dental record match. One face stopped him cold. Aaron Ellis, also known as Buck, convicted of weapons trafficking, released 8 months ago, last seen in Boise. And in his arrest photo, a front tooth was snapped clean in half. David stared at the image. Ellis. He pinned the photo to the wall beside the children's names. Blais stood beside him, tail flicking once. David looked down at his partner. "We're not done yet, buddy." David Logan stared at the mugshot tacked to the wall. Aaron Ellis. The name found scrawled inside the suspect's jacket lining, the face matching Madison Reeve's haunting whisper. A man with a half-broken front tooth and a history of vanishing between prison stints, aliases, and fake shipping licenses. Now, a prime suspect in a multi-state child trafficking ring. Blais sat quietly beside David's desk, eyes flicking between the wall and his handler, as if sensing what was coming next. "Ellis is still out there," David muttered. Agent Russell stepped in, holding a thick folder of updates. "We traced his last known burner phone to an RV park outside Pocatello. He was there 4 nights ago, rented a trailer under the name William J. Boone, paid cash, and disappeared before sunrise." "Anyone see him with a child?" David asked. Russell nodded grimly. "A gas station clerk said he saw a little girl with him. Might have been Madison, but he also mentioned something else." David raised an eyebrow. "He said Ellis came back alone. They had the name. They had the face. But Ellis wasn't just another street-level criminal. He was smart, careful, a ghost in broad daylight. And somewhere between the Elko truck stop and the RV park in Pocatello, He had dumped Madison and vanished. The team mapped every known rest stop, motel, truck depot, and hidden route between the two locations. But Blay had already given them a lead that no database could match, a trail that started in dirt and blood and now needed to be followed to the end. David and Blay were wheels up in under 2 hours, heading northwest in an unmarked SUV. The air grew colder the farther they drove. Fall was giving way to winter, and the mountain passes ahead would be dusted with snow by nightfall. Their first stop was the RV park. The manager was a wiry man in his 60s, with a permanent scowl and a habit of smoking indoors. "Yeah, the guy with the busted tooth," he muttered, kept to himself. Pulled in just after midnight. Rented lot 17. Didn't want hookups, just a flat spot to park. "Was he alone?" David asked. The man scratched his jaw. "Not at first. He had a kid with him. Tiny thing, curly hair, looked scared." David's pulse quickened. When the man left, "Gone before sunrise," he said. "No kid." David thanked him and turned to Blay, who had been quietly sniffing the perimeter of the trailer pad. "Find him, buddy." Blay lowered his head and moved fast, nose pressed to the gravel, tail stiff, body taut with focus. He led them around the back of the park, through a stretch of tall weeds to a clearing near a dry creek bed. Then he stopped. David followed, flashlight sweeping the ground. There it was, a torn receipt, half crumpled, stuck under a rock. He picked it up and carefully unfolded it. A fuel receipt time-stamped 4:03 a.m. from a station in a town called Stanley, 2 hours further north. Ellis was running a loop. They chased him from gas station to gas station, always just missing him by hours. In one place, he bought rope, in another a burner phone. At a general store, a bag of candy, baby wipes, and, strangely, a child's plush bear. Each item sent a chill down David's spine. Then came the call from Salt Lake. A former associate of Ellis's, currently serving time on gun charges, had caught wind of the case from the news and wanted to talk. Russell met David in a secure interview room the next morning. The inmate was covered in tattoos, his eyes dull and restless, nerves twitching every time Blay shifted his paws nearby. "Ellis!" the man rasped. "Yeah, I knew him. Kept quiet mostly. Creepy as hell. Had this idea, said people don't care about invisible kids." David leaned in. "What do you mean by invisible?" "Kids that don't get searched for. Kids without papers. Foster kids bouncing around. The system just loses track of them." David felt his jaw tighten. "How many did he take?" The man shrugged. "I don't know. He didn't brag. Kept things close. But he said something once. I didn't get it until now." David fixed him with a stare. "What did he say?" The man smirked. "Said he took the others, but I kept him." David's stomach dropped. Madison had said those exact words. Only now they carried a darker weight, not just poetic or personal, but chillingly literal. Their break came the next day. A park ranger in the foothills outside Twin Falls reported a suspicious van parked deep in the woods, plates stripped, windows covered with cardboard. When no one answered, he peeked inside, and what he found made him call state police immediately. Cages. Small ones. Empty, but stained. David arrived at the scene before sunset. The van's interior was cold and stripped. The front seats gone, replaced by bolted chains. Childlike drawings were taped to the walls, distorted and haunting. One showed a man with a missing tooth. Another depicted a dog, brown and black. David crouched to look closer. The child had drawn Blay. She remembered him. Blay stood at the back of the van, sniffing, then let out a low growl. Not aggressive, but unsettled. His nose led him to a canvas bag buried beneath boxes of rags. David unzipped it. Inside were files and photos, dozens of them, some recent, some old. All of children, catalogued meticulously with times, dates, and notes on their condition. Russell arrived as David sifted through the pile. "What the hell is this?" David held up a photo. It was Toby, from 2 weeks ago, wearing the same shirt they'd found him in. "If these are still here," David whispered. "Ellis left in a hurry. That night a bolo was issued. Be on the lookout for Aaron Ellis, now officially charged with federal trafficking, unlawful transport of minors, and attempted murder of a child. Every law enforcement agency across 4 states had his face, but he was still one step ahead." David sat at his desk, rubbing his tired eyes. He felt exhaustion deep in his bones. Blay nuzzled his arm gently. "You think we'll get him?" David asked. Blay sat up straight, alert, then stared at the map. The line of dots. The missing connections. David narrowed his eyes. Ellis wasn't running aimlessly. He was heading back through Idaho, returning to the one place they hadn't yet searched. The mountains. A long-abandoned campground, shut down years ago after a landslide, known as a hideout for smugglers. David stood, grabbed his coat, and pointed to the map. "Let's finish this." Blay was already at the door. The road into the mountains was half swallowed by time. Cracked pavement gave way to dirt. Pine branches stretched over the windshield like reaching arms. Fog hung low, curling around the cruiser's tires like smoke. The world felt eerily quiet, almost poetic, except for the pounding in David Logan's chest. Blay sat in the passenger seat, laser-focused on the road ahead. Every twitch of his ears, every rise of his shoulders told David what his gut already knew. They were close. The abandoned campground, once a summer retreat, had been condemned after the landslide. No cell service, no streetlights, just a gravel path leading into silence. David parked behind a wall of overgrown brush and killed the engine. Blay was already out before David unlatched his seatbelt. "Track," David whispered, no hesitation. Blay bolted forward, nose inches from the ground, weaving through tree roots and fallen logs. David followed, flashlight low, sidearm holstered, heart pounding in rhythm with every rustle of the wind. They reached what used to be the main lodge. The roof had collapsed. Moss and mildew covered the walls. But Blay didn't stop. He pushed deeper into the trees. Then David heard it. A soft clang, metal against metal. They weren't alone. Blay led him to a narrow path just off the main trail, half covered in pine needles. It ended at a small clearing where an old supply shed stood. The wooden door was padlocked. Vents rusted shut, but a faint orange glow leaked through a crack in the frame. David drew his weapon and circled wide. Blay crouched low. "Hold," David whispered. He counted to 3, then kicked the door open. Inside, a propane lantern cast a dim light. There was a table, a cot, a cooler, and in the corner, a man with hollow eyes and a broken front tooth. Aaron Ellis. He didn't flinch, just looked up as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "Well," Ellis said, voice rough as gravel, "took you long enough." David kept his gun trained. "Don't move." Ellis raised his hand slowly. "I'm not stupid," Blay growled from the doorway. Ellis looked at him and smirked. "Ah, the famous one." David stepped in. "Where are the others?" Ellis tilted his head. "Others? Kids? Who's still missing?" Ellis chuckled. "You think I kept records? You think this was all me?" David moved closer. "We found your files. We found the cages. We found Madison." Ellis's face twitched. "The girl, she was supposed to be taken somewhere safe." "Buried alive in a suitcase," David snapped. Ellis shrugged. "Better than where the others went." David's stomach turned. "Where?" But Ellis only smiled. "You already know. Back at the station." Ellis was booked without incident. At the campground, they found more. Burner phones, cash, forged IDs, and something far worse. A flash drive. On it were records. Video files, logs, names, some still redacted, some still missing. But it was enough. Federal agents swept through cities across 3 states that same week. 3 more men were arrested. 2 women in one trailer were found with another child, alive, terrified but safe. David and Blay had cracked the chain. Not just one child, not just Madison, but all of them. A month later, the precinct held a ceremony. Blay was honored in front of a crowd of officers, families, and community members who had followed the story like a lifeline. Blay sat proudly beside David, wearing his polished vest. His name was now engraved on a silver medallion. K9 Blay, service beyond the call. When the mayor handed David the microphone, he kept his words simple. "I've worn this badge for 15 years, he began, "but I've never had a partner like Blay. He didn't just sniff out evidence or follow a trail. He uncovered the truth when the rest of us were still chasing shadows." David glanced at Blay, then back at the crowd. Thanks to him, 28 children are alive today. The applause lasted for 2 full minutes. After the ceremony, David made one last visit to the hospital. Madison was recovering well. She had been placed with a foster family approved for adoption, and her smile had returned. soft, fragile, but genuine. When Blay entered the room, her face lit up. She wrapped her arms tightly around his neck and whispered something only David could hear. "Thank you for keeping me safe." David blinked back tears and handed her a plush K9 toy. "This one stays with you now." That night, David and Blay walked through the same park where their journey had begun. The air was calm and peaceful. David tossed a tennis ball across the field, and Blay chased after it with the same joy as if nothing had changed, like the world wasn't filled with dark corners and broken souls. And maybe that was the point. Even in the darkest times, there are still good dogs, still good people, still heroes. They don't wear capes. They wear vests with patches that say K9. They bark at the unthinkable. They dig up the truth. And they never stop tracking those who need saving. Thank you so much for following the journey of Officer David Logan and Blay. We hope their story has reminded you of the power of loyalty, courage, and hope. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you do if your dog suddenly led you to something terrifying, but also life-changing?